Sure. Welcome back, everyone. We welcome now the session by the Regenerative Society Foundation. Moderating this session is Giovanna Gregori, Director of the Regenerative Society Foundation. Giovanna, over to you.
Thank you, Gladys. Good morning to everybody. Our discussion today is about sustainable ecosystems of connected and prosperous communities. To give you a bit of context, mitigation measures in food, farming, and forestry can provide as much as 20–30% of the emission reduction needed to limit global warming to 1.5 or 2 degrees above pre-industrial. So this is the reason why we're focusing on this today and in our activity as a Regenerative Society Foundation. So agriculture needs to move from exploitation to regeneration of soils. This is the context where and the approach that the foundation has. And today we have a panel of guests. We have Joe Puri, Associate Vice President, Strategy and Knowledge Department, IFAD. And I leave, before introducing all the other guests, I leave the word to Joe for the opening remarks.
Thank you so much, Giovanna. Lovely to be here, and thank you so much for inviting me to the panel. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and dear panelists. As part of my opening remarks, I want to make 3 points. First, given what we are seeing with respect to climate change and poverty, and acknowledging that these are wicked problems, so there's no one solution that is going to help us deal with them, innovations are key. But innovations for systems are key. So that's the first point I want to make. The second point I want to make is public-private partnerships. I know it's a cliche, but are crucial. And IFAD has been doing a lot in public-private partnerships, and clearly the foundation can play a very important role in that. And the third point I want to make today is that multi-stakeholder voices and diversity is clearly important, but I think to that mix, we've got to add evidence. And evidence is something that IFAD is innovating with and is really working hard to build both on efficacy as well as on effectiveness. So let me go back and talk about the 3 points. First, that for poverty and for climate change, it's clearly important that we think about innovations that tackle systemic challenges. In this context, the Adaptation for Smallholder Agriculture Program, or ASAP, is a key program that we have that really helps us to bring in blended finance innovations into agriculture as well as into climate change to really think about taking first losses when we bring in the private sector. IFAD works with financial innovations, with technological innovations, as well as with behavioral innovations. And I know that previous speakers have spoken about behavioral innovations. But in terms of, say, financial innovations, we are working with things such as digressive insurance, where it is clearly important that people in the Sahel that are dealing with climate change, that are dealing with drought, floods, food insecurity, are building in adaptive processes into their own livelihoods to then deal with resilience to climate change. Digressive insurance essentially means that you build a program that is multi-year where farmers' premia are increased slowly. This means that a norm for insurance taking and buying can be built amongst farmers that are otherwise not likely to buy expensive insurance. So that's essentially an example of financial innovations that we are seeing. The second example that we are putting out with respect to Adaptation for Smallholder Farmers program, which has really now built innovations in more than 41 countries with farmers in those countries, is really seeing as to how we can build behavioral innovation and diversify food production systems away from those that are not regenerative, that are environmentally not sustainable. So, for example, in East and Southern Africa, we are working with farmers using blockchain technologies to get them financial access, but also move away from production systems that are otherwise exploitative and not sustainable. Where wheat, for example, acts as a production system that is not useful for farmers, but getting them to move towards cassava over multiple years. In the second context, the second point I want to make today is really the cruciality of public-private partnerships. I think it's clear that public-private partnerships are important because, to be very clear, IFAD is a public institution. We work with non-sovereign operations, so we work at the sovereign level as well as at the non-sovereign level to bring in innovations both at the subnational level as well as at the national level. But I think the importance of recognizing the role of public institutions is really in recognizing how symbiosis works. So IFAD, for example, really takes on the risk of first losses with a lot of the financial transactions that we want the private sector to come in on. In renewable energy technologies, with climate change, with serving the poor and helping them to graduate from being ultra poor to poor, we are putting out financial mechanisms that are bringing in the private sector and instigating them and building incentives for them to build green credit lines in countries in Africa, as well as in Asia, as well as Latin America. And then the third point is really the criticality of evidence. I think it's important and clear that with innovation and with scaling up, what we want to see is the efficacy of small innovations being tested before they are scaled up to becoming impactful programs. And there, IFAD is innovating both on the behavioral side as well as on the product and process side through our impact evaluations, through recognizing that using good, high-quality evidence to understand what works, what doesn't, for whom, is clearly important. This is one of the reasons that we are seeing large improvements in the resilience of more than 14% of our stakeholder group amongst 112 million households that we are servicing across the world. An increase in resilience by more than 14% is a consequence of the fact that we are trying and testing both at pilot stages as well as at scaled up stages as to whether something works or not, for whom, why, and how much. With that, Giovanna, back to you.
Thank you very much, Jo. I just wanted to check if Mr. Tonellini is online. Is not? Okay, maybe we'll give him some remarks later. So I'm passing to introduce you the guest for the discussion. We have Andrea Illy, co-founder and co-chair of the Regenerative Society Foundation and chairman of Illy Cafe. We have Luca Alinovi, founder of Farmshine. And we have Sara Mbago Bunu, regional director, East and Southern Africa Division, IFAD, who's going to address the final remarks. I would like to give a word to Andrea to introduce us a little bit, which are the approach of the foundation and how the foundation is developing a first pilot program in Kenya and then in Africa, which is going to then Luca describe in details. So please, Andrea, if you want to tell us a bit.
Thank you. Thank you, Giovanna. Can you hear me? Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. And thank you for the kind introduction, Jo, which allows me to work on what you said. So we had the opportunity together with a few entrepreneurs and a brilliant scientific committee and together with Jeffrey Sachs to work for more than 2 years now at the, let's say, finalization of this Regenerative Society Foundation. it all started from agriculture, but I will describe the agriculture last. But let me first tell you about the outcome. So basically, we developed a framework, which is a systemic one, because we very much think that because sustainability is about complex systems, which are not linear and not predictable, it would be really mistaken to try to adopt a reductionistic approach, risking not to solve problems, or even worse, to solve problems and create new problems. So we definitely adopted the first approach to be systemic, as I will describe. The second big approach that we adopted with this framework is to pursue co-benefits, social environmental co-benefits. So the three, let's say, macro factors are well-being, meant as health and happiness, because the problem is not nature. The problem is humans, too many humans, and wrong economic model, wrong behavior, everything has to be. So we consider that if citizens more aware about that their quality of life depends upon the what they live, they will be more environmental conscious through circularity, which is the second pillar of macro factor of the model. Circularity meant as natural resource depletion, no matter if belonging to the geosphere or the biosphere, and particularly imperative to eradicate pollution, because the past and present extractive model, which is a parasitic one, based on keeping depleting natural resources without never restoring them, but even worse, producing an infinite amount of residues which are intoxicating, polluting the biosphere, accumulating in the atmosphere, eventually preventing it from spontaneous regeneration. In this separation between nature and culture of the last century, we really made a mistake to think that we can kind of overcome the law of nature with culture and technology. It is not nature or culture, it's nature and culture. It's simple as that. So we now, we really needed to transition to a circular model, working like nature. Nature works in a simple way, only solar energy, and the perfect balance between the so-called production and disposal reactions. All biosynthesis reactions are perfectly balanced with a biodegradation one. If you think how genius it is that autotroph organisms, they feed themselves with only CO2 and water, and then they produce sugars and oxygen, and the heterotroph organism, perfectly complementary. They feed themselves with sugars and oxygen to produce water and CO2. This is circular, and it works like that since 3.6 billion years with perfect balance and no residues, no disorder, etc. This is the meaning of circularity that we must aim to with the new regenerative model. And last but not last, through circularity, you kind of detox the biosphere, triggering the spontaneous regeneration, meant as biodiversity conservation. Biodiversity is for sure considered to be responsible for life, not only the air we breathe, the water we drink, but also the food we eat and the health of the ecosystems we live in. But also the carbon stock, because all carbon stock, no matter if it is mineral or organics, starts from the organic one. Mineral carbon stock, the one which we extract with our fossil fuel, originally was an organic one. So, and the end of this virtuous cycle is, as a dividend, much healthier ecosystems and more beautiful for a better quality of life to those citizens which behaved responsible. So we are addressing now, because we adopted this systemic approach, we have a very interdisciplinary scientific committee. They are working now on a regenerative index, and we start operating to bring this model for the ecological transition from extractive to regenerative into companies. This is what the Regenerative Society is about, briefly, because I can tell more about that, but I wanted to come specifically to the origin of that, which is agriculture. So I had, as a chemist, the opportunity to go back to my books during a sabbatical in 2018 and study a model to decarbonize the company, which we kind of set a goal to be carbon-free in 2033, but in a circular way, because offsetting is not the solution. So how can you really create a way that you completely eliminate emissions in a circular way? So luckily, because we transform an agricultural product, we can work on the ecosystems where our coffee is grown. And I had the privilege to discover the study which has been presented in Paris in 2015 of the 4 per mille. This is the origin of regenerative agriculture. So the model that I developed is called the virtuous agriculture, because it is very much as the regenerative approach, pursuing not only an environmental but also a social benefit. And so the virtuous agriculture is regenerative and beneficial. Why that? The secret is enriching soil with organic carbon, which nourishes the soil microbiota, and through that, the soil fertility and the soil resilience. So this is how you also produce an agricultural product which is healthier in the sense that because you use less chemistry, less defensive agents, you have less residues. But also, as known, the extremely diversified microbiota produces many phytochemicals. Some of them are good for health in a sense they are either antioxidant or anti-inflammatory. And the idea is to prove that if you cultivate in a regenerative way, you also have a better, let's say, food composition for human health, and then demonstrate it. So this is one of the benefits of regenerative agriculture, that it can be basically healing soils, and through soil health, you get human health, sequestrating carbon, eventually having agriculture becoming carbon negative. We shall, let's say, push the envelope of biodiversity to the level, the agroecology. So not only the cultivated land, but also the natural reserves surrounding it, with extreme benefit, because if you have natural reserves around, let's say, your land, cultivated land, you get more biodiversity, which also creates more resilience. You have a much higher water retention and lower temperature, and so on and so forth. So this creates a lot of opportunity for innovation. Also, as far as food security is concerned, because agriculture is definitely threatened and impacting severely by climate change. And we will not be in the capacity to ensure food security for the growing population in the decades ahead. So I refer to the Eat Lancet Commission. They studied the kind of perfect diet for environmental and sustainability and health. And they make a very clear point that we shall slow down the amount of animal proteins that we consume, because this is where the people tend to confuse nutrition with experience. In the Western countries, we eat for fun, not necessarily for nutrition. This is why we tend to eat those foods which are maybe creating nutritional disorders, which are also negative for health. So we shall eat less, also from the dietary and health point of view, animal proteins. And in order to compensate that, we shall diversify much more the vegetable proteins intake. And this will contribute to the biodiversity and making agriculture more regenerative, also because one of the paradigms of regenerative agriculture is multi-crop. This is extremely relevant when it comes to public-partnership today, when we are talking about the food crisis, because it's completely insane that we have 50% of the human calories intake depending only on 3 crops, rice, corn, and wheat, when we have over 4,500 plants, edible plants that can be cultivated. So the two things, kind of food security or even food sovereignty for countries, go together with this environmental and health, let's say, imperative identified by the Eat Lancet Commission. So this is why I want to bring to the attention of the European Union to do a bold project for bringing regenerative supply chain agriculture in Africa, because by doing so, we would be able not only to give them food, so allow them to produce the food they eat, creating jobs, at the same time having a positive environmental impact and also providing a good alternative to immigration. This is a project that it's a dream, or let me say more than a project, that I would be glad to work with IFAD to really, I briefly introduced the topic to Commissioner Gentiloni, and I would be very happy to team up to bring this opportunity to the level of the EU, which is the most interested one, because we are the geography most impacted by the Ukraine war, and we are the bordering countries with Africa, most involved with the migratory flows. So I think it's an urgency, a similar approach in Europe as the Green Deal for agriculture, not only in Europe, but also in the Mediterranean bordering countries. And as far as the pilot project that we have in Kenya together with Farmshine, nobody better than Luca Linovi can describe the project, which is a kind of a proof of concept of this model that I would like to bring together with IFAD to the European Union. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Andrea. So just going to Luca, I make a quick recap of the 4 key aspects that we are addressing with this pilot program and with this approach particularly. So the transition, which Andrea recalled recently, transition from subsistence farming to supply chain agriculture, food security for local population, ecosystem services, and, as we said, alternative crops to dominant commodity crops. From you, we would like to learn more about the pilot, but also to understand what's the real goal, how are you planning to touch the largest number of farmers, etc. So, please.
Thank you, Joanna. And I have a small presentation, so I hope it will come up. In the meanwhile, let me explain very simply that we came to the foundation because we found such a common intent that was almost magic in a sense, because we were starting a very small startup in the middle of Kenya, almost nowhere, and we are trying exactly to address the challenge that you guys have been saying, or at least a subset of it, waiting to find different partnership to make that happening. Because going back to Joe's initial point, is not just a matter of public-private partnership, but also is a matter of the proper private-private partnership and public-public partnership. So it's a complicated process to deal with systems rather than with a linear approach, as Andrea was mentioning before. Can I have next? Next again. So there are basically 3 big goals, coming back to your initial question, Giovanna, to make sure that we achieve what is needed to address what has been said up to now. The first one is that community need to be interconnected. I'm sure that after this first slide, a lot of people will feel, okay, but that is exactly what it is. In reality, that's exactly what it is not, unfortunately. So interconnection between people and being people able to address what the market demands. It's fantastic. I mean, some of you knows me. I've been in the UN for a long time before going back to the private sector. And I always assumed that a number of things were happening, even when I was in the field working deeply with farmers. And I suspect we tend to underestimate a substantial set of problems. First of all, people are not connected to the market and they have not clear idea what the market requires to smallholder. So addressing that and creating the condition for which smallholders are able to deal with market in a proper term is a super complex item in its own. Second, in order to do so, we need to have a proper technology and proper know-how, which allow us to simplify the way in which this is happening. And going back to one of the key points that Joe was saying before, to have really solid data for telling what we need to know. It's complicated, it's super complicated again, because we tend to know quite well aggregated data about farmer. We tend to have no clue about the individual smallholder. And so it makes extremely difficult to analyze the data in a proper way when that is the case. And this most of the time is the case. And finally, but I would say most important, and that's exactly why we are together, looking at how we created those number of co-benefit that allows the farmer to produce more, be more focused on income and revenue, and at the same time address two things: how to save CO2 rather than produce CO2, and how to be more biodiverse possible to make money. Now there, I have to say, I bring my Italian bias, I have to admit it, my Mediterranean bias. For us, biodiversity means money. Why shouldn't happen for the farmer? When we are able to sell the only one black chickpea that comes from that area, we sell it 5 times, 10 times higher. Now, the typical counter argument, unfortunately, in my previous life, I was one of these economists, of some of the guys here that I see in the room are old friends of those days, will say, but then the scale will never reach what needs to be reached to make money. And recently I was making a presentation to the Ugandan government, and I mentioned to them that the Parmesan cheese, one of our niche products, it's worth 10% of the GDP of Uganda. So it's not that bad being a niche product sometimes. So I would like really to see how we can become create a number of niche products that allows the farmers to be really wealthy, having unique products that come from Africa. We have the bad behavior of paying food that come from Africa almost as a charity. We don't think it's really good, but we have to do it. I think we have to change the narrative. We have to create the narrative for which eating African products is much better than ours. It's more healthy, is new things, is creating opportunity. Next one. So, allow me a bit of provocative titles. I will not read you the list, it's terribly long. I want just to say, the reality is that a number of the value chains with which we deal, and we want to continue to deal, which are mainly pulses and protein production value chain, are broken. There is no connection between a smallholder and a buyer. There is no connection between a seed producer and the final buyer. So the farmer is not able to buy the right seed because has no clue of what is the seed that justifies the product that has to go to the market. And this is happening not because of chance. It's not happening because of poor technology only. It's happening because there are very specific interests, very specific people which play a game to keep dark, foggy information because they make money out of it. And these are middlemen. These are people which create debt for the farmer. I don't know who is knowledgeable on the financial situation in Kenya, but let me tell you, the unofficial money lender in Kenya, where I work, takes between 20 to 35% per month. That means that in 3 months, they have to pay 100%. So the duration of the shortest seasonal cycle, has to pay 100% of what has been paid by that. But the legal financial instrument, particularly financial app, have an interest rate between 60%, the cheapest one, to to 365%. This we're talking about apps which are managed by the largest institutions in Kenya. So there is a problem of debt, which is massive and which is forcing the farmer to a semi-slavery situation, which the only way that I see in my simple mind is to make sure that through trade, the revenue increases so dramatically that the demand in that term decreases importantly and the capacity of repaying increases importantly. I have to say that the list goes long and long and long. Obviously, there is all the lack of functioning of logistics. There are several areas, for example, the inland of Lamu, where the cost of the first 3 miles is equivalent to the cost of the next 150 miles for the long transport. So the first 3 miles between the farmer and our aggregation point, the cost of transport of these 3 miles, it costs the equivalent of 150 miles for our truck to bring it from Peketoni to Mombasa. It's clear that if these costs are not controlled, if the supply chain is not managed, if the supply chain is not handled in a way that leads to efficiency and eliminating the gatekeeper, you continue to see inevitably the farmer being the loser. And that's the way to change the game. The last but not least important is that we really believe in what Andrea Illy said before. We profoundly believe in it. There is no happy environment without happy people. There are not happy people without an happy environment. It's a very simple, it's a very intuitive concept, but then needs deep dives. So if there is no education, or if the cost education is higher than the total revenue that the farmer has to make, the smallholder, to pay the education become impossible, and you became again slave of debts. There are no infrastructure. There is no water. Water is a massive problem in these days. I'm sure that my friend Sarah knows more than me what I'm talking about, but definitely it's a drama. There's no water not only for agriculture, there's no water for people. The water has an increased salinity happening in all the place because of this continuous drought that continue to happen in shorter and shorter cycle. There is water which is heavily contaminated, which makes it almost impossible to use it. But there are no capacity of storing produce. When people tell me it's very simple at the end doing beans, what is it? Doing beans is very simple. In 4 weeks, if you don't store it properly, in 4 weeks, the entire baggage of beans that we buy from a farmer, if it's not controlled, gets spoiled completely because of weevils and because of insects. So that requires a lot of operational logistics to avoid these kind of things happening. And obviously, there is limited access to not only education, but also to health and services related. These are not really our direct contribution, but if the farmer has more revenue, is able to pay for some of these services. Unfortunately, in Kenya, it's a lot of that are paid services. And obviously, there is an incredible, as I said before, an incredible limited capacity in financial services, which is really a drama for people. And it is so dramatic. And obviously, what happened is that a lot of people create opportunity to get better financial services, but create conditions for which the farmer are not able to fulfill, or they have to pay still an interest rate incredibly high, even if it's done by official organization. Next slide, please. So what we want to achieve, Andrea said some of that. For us, healthy soil is an incredible drive of what we want to see happening. And the healthy soil is not difficult to achieve if we do the right things. We want to see the agricultural diversification taking place. It's an incredible opportunity. I'm sure that a lot of you guys love the beans that you find in Italy. I have to tell you a story. Unfortunately, most of that are not produced in Italy, not anymore. But people forget to say where they come from. So you're thinking that you're eating the wonderful Italian borlotti. Unfortunately, it's not. They are wonderful borlotti, but not Italian. So I have to tell you the news. And a number of them apply the same way. Because they come a lot from Ukraine, and now we have a big crisis, what we do from Ukraine, that is not getting us a number of those beans. simply, I think it's time to use the diversification in Africa to create, as I said before, premium product. And then, as I said before, wealthy families is very simple. Going through our process, we are working with more or less 20,000 farmers today. More or less all our farmers from the first transaction increase the revenue around 30%. It's very simple. There are less middlemen, less inefficiency. It's very simple. We can make money as a company, we are a company, and still they can increase 30% of their income if you do the right thing. And then you need an healthy society. You need to find a way to allow the farmer to aggregate in an efficient way. I haven't mentioned it yet, it's one of my preferred parts of the story, creating what we call e-cops. That means we use the digital world to create cooperative, which have been very inefficient in the traditional way, but can become an incredible prospect for the future of the farmers. Yes, and then access to finance, as I mentioned before. Next one. Next one, again. I will not enter in the details, I will just, because I know the time is really killing. I know that I see Giovanna getting a bit anxious, so I really have to rush in. But I would say that we work in three big areas with this program. We work a lot in the field. I'm not part of the tribe of the startuppers of Nairobi. I never go to meeting in Nairobi, I don't have time. Unfortunately, I have to work in the field. 70% of our people are in the field. We work always with people and farmers. We don't have time for that. We work in the market. We deal a lot with buyers. We make sure the buyers do the right thing, pay the right premium for our people. And we try to build a co-benefit where we are leading to, but this partnership will become a critical system to make this happening because a lot of things are not yet functioning in that process. Can I have the next one? And as I said before, we're going to change, we are changing a lot in the market already. We need a lot of support, Joe, I have to tell you very openly, to create the right process for making the CO2 market functioning. We are not good enough as a single company. We need partnership to make it happening. We need partnership to create the right infrastructure strategy. We need partnership to scale up and grow the number of farmers that can benefit on that. It's very direct. Apologies if I'm so straightforward, but that is where we really have to lead in make the things happening brutally, if I can say so. The next one. And I already mentioned several of them, so I will not spend time on that because of the time thing. Obviously, the representation is available for everyone. I think we're getting faster to the last slide. Can we go to the next one? Next one. Sorry, no, let's keep 1 second. Can I go just 1 second back? So back to Joe's point, we have created a very clear number of measurements. Also in line with my previous work, I see that there is, we have put the resilience index that has been mentioned a few times. We're putting really strict measurements for each one of the things for all our beneficiaries. We're not going to use sample techniques. We're using really every one of our beneficiaries to make the data being realistic and being usable for checking on us and make sure that we make the changes that we promise. Next one. Is a very last point before the last one. We really think that it's time to certify what we are talking and certify with a credible mechanism, which means, what does it mean to create a regenerative product? We mentioned it several times. It's about quality. It's about quality of the environment that produce it. It's about quality of the people that benefit of it. And these three themes are part of the process that we want really to establish to create unique products for which people should queue in the supermarket to buy and not should think I'm doing a charitable work for the poor African farmer that is not able to do a good job. I think it's really a dream to change completely the narrative, as I mentioned before. Next one. Next, this is the real one. And I already mentioned to you, I think it's really, if we want to put the smallholder at the center of the global market, we need to bring together several partners, both in the private sector and the public sector. And that's why we need containers of this partnership, which are much bigger than a small startup like us, or just bigger of individual company interest. And then can only come between process like the one that we are designing. We need to make the local market functioning, but we need to make the global market being able to handle this type of changes. And we need to have financial systems that are really addressing the needs of the farmer. There is too much pre-design, too little listening from the farmer what they need. Often we offer them a system to pay beans, seeds, and we don't offer them a system to pay the school fees. And the poor guy has to sell his own seeds that he's bought with a loan to pay the school fees and putting their own seed there. So we should really be able to listen what is happening there. And finally, very last point, very important, making sure that we integrate the environmental benefit with the social benefit and the market and the finance sustainability, which is really the critical part of this process. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Luca. Now we have Renzo Tomellini connected. Mr. Tomellini is the Chief Technical Secretariat of the Ministry for the Italian Ministry for the Ecological Transition. So welcome and thanks for joining us. So I take the point of public-private partnerships to give the word to you. And also the key point is these kind of models can be scaled, and is there a future for scaling up this kind of pilots and of models?
Yeah, good morning. Sorry for my voice. I achieved to get COVID after all, so I'm now here in exile, and if I drink water, please forgive me, it's to hydrate a little bit. Yeah, absolutely important. First, let me bring the greetings of Minister Professor Dr. Cingolani, and congratulations for this very important project and approach. Public-private relationships and synergy is essential to be successful in this kind of approach. We already talk about governance instead of government. The government in the 19th century Hegelian romantic approach was able to guide the society. Now the societies and the issues, the challenges, the problems, the interdependencies are so complex and so many that only an alliance, a deep alliance between the private and the public can approach and bring to good results and enterprise. That's why the word government slowly has been replaced by the word governance in the sense exactly of bringing together the actors of change, the actors of innovation in the socio-economic arena, both being private and being public. Mr. Illy was talking about the substance of the project, mentioning the need to overcome the separation. He mentioned the separation between culture and nature. It is an issue. We can have the separation between the quantity and the quality, between the intensity of the production and the durability of the production, between the exploitation of the soil and the regeneration of the soil, between in case of energy, the renewable energy approaches and the biodiversity. So now we can overcome these because of the culture, because we know, because we have been studying, because we have been researching, because we have approaches that can overcome this separation, this dichotomy, this diaballein, throw separately. Diabolo means the one who throws the balls into different fields, the one who separates. So absolutely important, and important also the moment now, because it is 2022, 50 years ago, to 1972, there was the Conference of Stockholm, and there was the book by the Club of Rome, The Limit of Development. So in these 50 years, a half a century, there has been a growing consciousness of the importance of this issue, as well as of the that it is unavoidable to tackle it, to tackle together and urgently. So the urgency, the necessity are now clear to everybody. So this project is particularly valuable also because of this systemic, integrated, interdisciplinary approach tackles all the pillars of sustainability, the economic, the environmental, and the social, the inclusivity. The innovation is not only technological, it's also financial, it's also behavioral. It is science-based, so it has all the elements to be a model that can be scaled up and taken as an example. However, must be an however. I cannot say only positive things in life. It's not my karma, not my character. However, it is important to make probably now an engineering of the project. So cut off different parts within a whole, within a holistic approach, within a systemic interconnected approach, but cut off some elements, some project that can be operationalized more easily and find funding, because there's also a point of financing for the different part of the project, because some projects, knowing the European Commission's funding schemes, knowing national funding schemes, knowing less global funding schemes, some projects can find specific windows for implementation. And this is something that probably has to be now developed. So engineering, project engineering within a systemic, holistic approach and this interconnected vision that has been very wisely, very skillfully developed. Maybe another point that I can highlight, because it's not been mentioned in the course of this session, is modeling. Modeling is very important. Traceability is very important. The model of models, the connection of models. And this is very important to have it, to develop, and to let it know. Because the point is to behave well, but also to let other actors of change know that there is a virtual behavior that can be scaled up, that can be multiplied. So project engineering and modeling, traceability, and communication are elements that are of key issues of key importance now for the prosecution and successful development of this project. And once again, congratulations for this very important project and this very valuable and winning approach, winning for everybody.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm time conscious, so I know we are at the end of a session. I have a couple of questions that just came online, but I would like to pass the word to Sarah for the closing remarks. We will try to address the questions separately because we want to disrupt the flow of the session. Please, Sarah.
Well, thank you very much. I have the honor of delivering the closing remarks for this session, and that's not a very easy feat to do, but I think the session has really been very exciting, and it actually served its purpose in the sense of providing us with a platform to learn from a very concrete example and very important new landscape for programming. And in respect to IFAD, this is essential for us. I'm happy to announce here that Eastern Southern Africa and IFAD has an outreach of 40 million small-scale farmers. So this really blends in very well with the scalability aspects that you have been looking at. And as many other development actors, and many of you also know, we don't allude to having the experience of doing everything. We have experiences with doing regenerative agriculture ecosystem services, and they stop short of finance, the essential piece that Mr. Lilly talked about. We do have experiences with working with digital vouchers that provide inputs at scale, even in Kenya. but then they're not necessarily looking at the biodiversity aspects as essentially as we would like. So we see this as a very key opportunity and one of the ways in which we are going to have new generation operations. And I think Mr. Tomelin really mentioned it very well here when he said it's a new way of thinking, it's a new way of programming, it's a new way of partnering. So what are the key takeaways from this public-private sector, let's say, innovative way of programming? Coming in with the market, starting with the market, will stimulate and encourage small-scale farmers to invest, but also bringing on a lens of resilience. From the very beginning, looking at soils. This is what we want to build in. Soil fertility management makes all the difference in terms of productivity. I think that's very key. The fact that we will be able to introduce traceability isn't something that we have done systematically as of yet, but I think in terms of putting the East African lentils and pulses, because in fact, East Africa is the biggest hub in the world globally of lentils and green beans. And there's a lot that's exported to India and elsewhere that, as you rightly mentioned, this is not known. And people don't have this idea, but introducing that will make the difference. The logistical operations through the digital platform, water management is really one of the most critical things that will break and make production systems going forward. This is absolutely, we actually see it in Southern Africa as waterlands dry. I don't want to talk about the Sahel, but really groundwater recharge is an essential problem. We have to look at that. And then when we look at digitizing of rural communities, there's lots of discussion around what that actually means. Do we empower them to own their own information and to enter the digital space, so the digital identity, to the digital footprint, and they can manage that data themselves? It's quite different from just digitizing them in an unempowered way. And I think that is absolutely critical. So we look forward to that. And of course, in East Africa, we have made so much progress in terms of digital and digital solutions with the M-Pesas that you know of. I would like to just simply end by saying that public-private partnerships that already look at balanced relationships from the onset, putting the small-scale farmer at the center, looking at rebuilding those essential value chains. East Africa has struggled with micro and medium scale enterprises, the ability to establish those in a profitable way and actually allow youth to have the opportunity to engage there and add value in a commercial way with innovation, looking at the business side of things will be absolutely critical. So I'm very excited about this partnership. It will probably be probably the second one. We're also looking at, in Southern Africa, looking at sustainable fiber, working with wool and mohair and lamb. So this will be probably the second one that we would launch ourselves in East Africa. And we're looking for financing opportunities to crowd in and blend these types of operations to scale. So I'm excited and I want to hand back to you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Thank you, everybody. I think we have run out of time. Thanks, IFAD, for hosting us and for this partnership, which is very valuable to us.
Giovanna, before our speakers leave the podium,